Hey guys, Claire here, and today I'm going to share with you the reading list for my podcast, A Time and a Plate. So if you haven't listened to it, please do. The description and link is below. I would love for you to listen to it. It's all about food history. The premise is honestly a little ambitious, but we made it through. The idea is that for every episode, we focus on either a trend, a food, a person, something that kind of covers one century in food history. So we start with the year 1000 and we go all the way through the 20th century. I did my 2016 reading list and I kept joking that I usually read more books, but most of the books I was reading were for the podcast this year. So I thought I would share those with you because who doesn't love a good book about food history? I mean, come on. I'm reading them off my phone because that's where I kept all the reading lists. For episode 1, I chose The Year 1000 by Robert Lacey and Danny Danziger. I loved this book. I love textural detail about life from another time. I think it's so fun. The Year 1000 is very conversational. It gives you a wonderful snapshot of what time during the Middle Ages was like. And additionally, I think it kind of breaks up a lot of those ideas of it being a dark time. It's funny, one thing I really took away from the podcast is this idea of historical bias and how as we look back, we apply our own knowledge and point of view onto the past instead of appreciating the past for what it was and understanding the context that surrounds it. Other ones that I read was Medieval Life by Paul Lacroix. So Medieval Life was definitely a little more scholarly, so it's a little more informational, but once again, if you are interested in medieval history, I think it provides a really wonderful kind of context and understanding of just cultural mores and how they ate, how they dressed, that kind of thing. So these 3 books, I'm only going to mention once because I honestly use them for the entire podcast. First is Cuisine and Culture, A History of Food and People by Linda Civitello. Food, A Culinary History from Antiquity to the Present, under the direction of Jean-Louis Flandrin and Massimo Montanari. History of Food by, I'm so bad at French, I'm so sorry, Maguelonne, Toussaint-Samat. So that's it for episode 1. Episode 1 was all about the history of bread and sort of how important bread was to medieval culture and medieval economy as well, and also religion. So then we go to episode 2, and this was so fun because we followed Eleanor of Aquitaine on the spice trail. So for this one, obviously, Eleanor of Aquitaine by Alison Weir. Amazing. Definitely read it. It's so fun. I love that book. I love Alison Weir. She creates an outline of a person by providing information of the time, culture, expectations, and other things written about them. So you start to get a sense of who the person was, even if there isn't a lot of great source material. So she's a really fabulous historian. An Edible History of Humanity by Tom Standage. This was a really great, if you just want a snapshot of food history in general, that is a good, fun book to read. You can actually sit and read that one through. Misconceptions About the Middle Ages, edited by Stephen J. Harris and Brian L. Grigsby. When you think of the Middle Ages, I think everyone thinks of Monty Python and Quest for the Holy Grail, of the witch weighing the same as a duck and that kind of stuff. So they do a great job of explaining how people actually thought and acted in the Middle Ages and how those misconceptions were formed as well, which is really interesting. Taste of Conquest by Michael Crondall was excellent. That actually follows almost the entire history of the spice trade. So that was a badass book. So episode 3 was all about Marco Polo, and this was so much fun. It was following him on his journey to China. So first up was City of Fortune by Roger Crowley, which I think, if I remember correctly, focused on the history of the city of Venice and Genoa and some of the wars there. It was really great. Marco Polo by Lawrence Bergreen was so fun. It was this amazing sort of swashbuckling adventure book, but historical. It was really interesting. The Land of Five Flavors by Thomas O. Hallman. So this is about the history of food in China, and that was really fascinating. I honestly don't have a lot of background in Eastern history. I am pretty silly in the sense that all of my attention usually goes to Western Europe. I honestly don't even know that much about American history. It's all Western European history. So it was really fun to start to kind of dip my toe into, especially Chinese history. Chopsticks, A Cultural and Culinary History by Q. Edward Wang. This was fascinating. This one was almost more of a anthropological or cultural study rather than a historical one, but it was really cool just to learn about how the entire world is broken into 3 different types of eaters. People who eat with their hands, so like in Africa and the Middle East, so they use bread and stuff as utensils. People who eat with a fork and knife, which is obviously America, like North America, Western Europe, etc. And then people who eat with chopsticks. And it's fascinating because you can see there's certain hubs where people would eat with all 3 because there was a ton of cross trade. So episode 4 was all about the Black Death, and this was amazing to read about. So it actually had quite a bit of crossover with episode 3 because it was also driven by the spice trade and driven by Genoa and Venice and stuff like that. So you'll see some crossover there. But City of Fortune pops up again. Taste of Conquest pops up again. Marco Polo again. And also for episode 4, I read The Great Mortality by John Kelly, which was a fantastic overview of the Black Death and plagues and how they ravaged, Europe at that time period, and honestly traveled all the way from, across the Asian basin to Europe. It was, pretty astonishing, but that was one of my favorite episodes to do research for. I kind of say that about every episode because I love reading and it's history. Episode 5. So this one was looking at pre-Columbian Mexico and the importance of chocolate, and then chocolate's influence on the Europeans as they sort of discovered it and appropriated it. I could not have done the research for this episode if it were not for this book. This is honestly the only book I found that had a history of chocolate that went all the way back to the Olmecs, and in a way that was completely in depth and took up a large portion of the book. It wasn't just like an introduction or a foreword or like the first chapter. And it was called The True History of Chocolate by Sophie Deco and Michael Deco. So episode 6 took us to Renaissance Italy and one of the world's first celebrity chefs known as Scapi. And so for this I read Delizia, The Epic History of the Italians and Their Food by John Dickey. I also read Italian Cuisine as Cultural History by Alberto Capati and Massimo Montanari. Episode 7 was the hardest episode to do research for. The topic was food and magic, and I wanted to focus on the Salem witch trial and the witch's cake being a key piece of evidence. I thought, oh yeah, like Hansel and Gretel, like food and witches, totally a thing. Like you think of Macbeth and the cauldron and all that. And, well, this is gonna be great. It was the hardest thing to do research for. I had to tease out information from sources and it was the most work I had to do. Which is stupid of me to complain. It was fun work though, but still, oh my God, no one's written that book. Please someone write that book. So I read Magic in the Middle Ages by Richard, I think it's Kiekhaefer, and this was great. I thought this was really fascinating. Once again, more scholarly, not like a casual read, but really fun. The Witches by Stacy Schiff was fantastic. She's really reminds me of Alison Weir in a lot of ways. Like she's a brilliant biographer. I wish there was a little more upfront historical context. That was the only thing I kind of was missing. But anyway, great book to read regardless if you're into the Salem witch trials. Religion and the Decline of Magic by Keith Thomas. And lastly, The Penguin Book of Witches, edited by Catherine Howe. And this was great too. It gives you a really nice overview of kind of what was happening in Salem at the time. There was a lot of sort of first person information. So I feel like if I was writing a research paper on it, I would totally have found it very useful. I found myself using most of the introductory elements from each chapter to help me through the podcast. So if you want something a little more conversational, I would go with Stacy Schiff, The Witches, but all of these books were super fun to read. So episode 8 takes us to Vienna, and Vienna was at war with the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and there's a huge siege. And we talk about the history of the croissant. One of the books I read was called The Bloody History of the Croissant by David Halliday. And then I also read The Enemy at the Gate by Andrew Wheatcroft, which definitely was not focused on the croissant, more was focused on the battle itself and the historical and kind of cultural circumstances surrounding it. But that's fascinating. If you love, sort of European history, then that would be a really fun one to get into. Episode 9, this book, I cannot believe it has not been optioned by Netflix for a series yet. It's called Cooking for the Kings, The Life of the First Celebrity Chef, Antonin Carême by Ian Kelly. And this book was straight up like reading The Three Musketeers. This guy was super handsome, became the most sought after, well-paid chef in Europe by the time he was 25, 26. He died young. He traveled the entire world. The Russians thought he was a spy. He cooked at like every important event in European history during that time. It's like a riot. If you at all were like into early 19th century history, like post-French Revolution, Waterloo, kind of Napoleonic era, oh my god, you're gonna like freaking love this. Let's see, I also read The Physiology of Taste by Brillat-Savarin. Cannot believe it took me that long to read that book. It's like, that's a really famous book and it's fantastic. And then I also read Word of Mouth, What We Talk About When We Talk About Food by Priscilla Parkhurst Ferguson. This wasn't really much of a history, but it was more like a cultural analysis of like the significance of Antonin Carême, Brillat-Savarin, and other sort of historic French writers from this time period. There's a huge shift in the understanding of food. Food didn't have the same kind of cultural identity that it does today, as it did like 200 years ago. So how we understand food today really was kind of created around that time period. Then the last episode was episode 10, which is all about the Berlin airlifts. And I can't believe I couldn't find this, but my very first paper, which I wrote in 8th grade, was about the Berlin airlifts. So I thought it was really fun to revisit it for the last episode. It's so brazen. Like, I love this as like the Berlin airlifts was just like a complete middle finger to the Soviet Union, and fascinating event. So I read Daring Young Men by Richard Reeves, which was really great. And then The Candy Bombers, The Untold Story of the Berlin Airlifts, and America's Finest Hour by Andrei Cherny. He's a former speechwriter for the White House, and both of these were really fun, very interesting books. And there actually was a pilot known as the Chocolate Pilot. So it's definitely worth reading both of those books, and such an interesting time period. But yeah, that's the list. So it's a lot of books. As I'm saying it out loud, I'm realizing I read a gross amount in the last 6 months. The podcast is just an opportunity for me to share the ideas of people who are so much more intelligent than me and have written down these amazing theories and thoughts. And I love getting to read their writing and kind of, coalesce it into a format that you guys get to enjoy it as well. And I love sharing stories. So to me, history is just one big story. And that's what I love about it. I also love that humans never seem to change. Anyway, well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning a little bit about the bibliography behind the podcast. I hope you listened to it. I'm pretty sure if you watched this entire video, you already listened to it. Whoever doesn't listen to the podcast and sat through this entire video, kudos to you. But hopefully by now you are interested in listening to it. You can binge listen because all 10 episodes are up. Season 2, which isn't going to happen for at least like 4 or 5 months, I think, minimum, is going to be all about American regional cuisine. All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching. Like the video if you like it. Comment below. Have you read any of the books I mentioned? Do you have any other recos? I would love, as you heard, I love reading, so please recommend. All right, cool. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.